Argumentative presentation on why antibiotics should not be used in food animals and why we are against it. Group number 6 consists of Matthew Bishop, Edwin Martinez, Yadira Esparza, and Kaylee Tate. I, Matthew Bishop, will be going over the history of antibiotics as well as some background information. Now, what are antibiotics? Antibiotics are a form of medicine. However, this isn't a form of medicine that is strictly for humans, as it has and will forever probably be used on animals. This medicine helps to fight off all kinds of different bacterial infections. What is a bacterial infection? Well, a bacterial infection is, in most cases, when the bad type of bacteria releases toxins that can damage cells and make humans and animals very sick. These antibiotics that were described before can be taken in several different ways. The first option is orally, which is through the mouth, and ingested. This can be things like pills. The second way is topically, which is something that is put on the skin, eyes, or ears. This can be anything from a cream to things like eye drops. The third and final way is through injection. Injection is going to be a needle or some sort of IV. Now, the first true antibiotic was penicillin. The man who discovered this was Alexander Fleming. If you look to the right of the slide, there's a picture of Alexander Fleming. Ever since then, we have constantly been improving upon and using them in all kinds of different areas of life. Now moving on, I, Matthew Bishop, will still be talking about the history of antibiotics in food animals specifically. Now, food animals are animals that are raised for consumption or products. This can range from meat to eggs to milk, etc. Since we are the ones consuming the majority of them, they are held to a very high degree of government regulation and oversight. Since they are so heavily watched, when we use things like antibiotics on them, it is very important that it is safe and won't harm the animal, product, but also us. Antibiotics are used for many reasons in food animals, such as treating diseases, preventing said diseases, promoting growth, which we will touch back on later, and increasing the overall performance of the animal. The first testing of antibiotics on food animals was approved by the FDA in 1951. The antibiotics allowed for rapid production of things like meat, which was very needed for the post-World War II world. Going back to what I said previously about antibiotics promoting growth, this was the only way that they would be able to produce enough meat was if they promoted the growth of these animals to produce more meat faster. While this also goes for us, if you overuse said antibiotics on the animals, it loses efficiency. This is what we call antibiotic resistance. The example I like to use is imagine you take an allergy pill every day, 365 days a year, and then you actually get allergies. Now you go and try and take an allergy pill, however that allergy pill doesn't work because you built up a resistance to it by taking it when you didn't really need it. Approximately 80% of all the antibiotics in the world go towards livestock, and that is quite the crazy number.
Hello, my name is Edwin Martinez, and I'm going to talk about the ethical aspects involved with antibiotics in food animals. I'm going to talk about antibiotic resistance, the ethical concerns that come with animals taking these antibiotics, and the public health risks that using antibiotics pose on us. So for number 1, antibiotic resistance. One of the main concerns is the idea of bacteria becoming more resistant to antibiotics. If common infections become resistant to standard antibiotics, it will become much harder for farmers and veterinarians to treat animal illnesses, which can lead to more serious health issues for animals. Number 2, ethical concerns with animals. Another huge concern is with how these antibiotics will impact the animal's well-being. Using antibiotics may be used to encourage poorer living conditions, like overcrowding. A lot of people argue that food animals deserve better living conditions, and the reliance on antibiotics might mask the underlying problems in the farming industry. Number 3, public health risks. The use of antibiotics in food animals can pose serious public health risks. If animals carry antibiotic-resistant bacteria, these bacteria can spread to human through consumption. This can create infections that are much harder to treat, which can cause a lot of problems on our healthcare system. Overall, antibiotics in food animals raise several concerns. Bacteria can become more resistant, which makes it harder to treat in both animals and humans. Ethical issues also come from antibiotics, which might enable overcrowding and unhealthy farming practices. And lastly, resistant bacteria can spread to humans through food, increasing the risk of infections that are much more harder for us to treat. All of these concerns highlight why we may want to stay away from the use of antibiotics in our food animals, or at the most limit our reliance on it and try to better the conditions for the food animals. I'm also going to be talking about our position against using antibiotics in food animals. I'm going to talk about antibiotic resistance. I'm going to talk about the impacts on the environment. And I'm also going to talk about the regulatory gap that's missing from the FDA. Number 1, antibiotic resistance. The consistent use of antibiotics in food animals can lead to something called antibiotic resistance. This is when microorganisms adapt and become resistant to our own antibiotics. This resistant bacteria can spread from animals to people through our own food. The CDC has warned us multiple times that the overuse of these antibiotics in animals can increase that threat significantly. Number 2, impacts on the environment. Overusing antibiotics in food animals can actually harm the environment. These drugs can lead to environmental contaminations. These drugs can contaminate the soil, water, and even the air, affecting ecosystems and the wildlife that lives in those ecosystems. Resistant bacteria from this contamination can spread, causing health risks to us. Number 3, regulatory gap. While the FDA does have some regulations on the use of antibiotics in animals, there are gaps in their rules. These regulations mostly cover antibiotics for treatment, but not for prevention. This lack of control can lead to the overuse of these antibiotics, which can contribute to antibiotic resistance, as we mentioned in the first one. Overall, the use of antibiotics in food animals contributes to what's called antibiotic resistance, which can harm the public health and the environment. FDA regulations do exist and can help to a certain extent. However, they can't prevent the misuse of the antibiotics, which is the main problem in causing antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Next, I wanted to talk about cultural and sociological importance for the use of vaccinations in animals that we use for meat and killing. One, I want to talk about antibiotics and how they help keep animals healthy, which is always important to all cultures since we heavily depend on farming for our main source of food supply. In many cultures, livestock play a crucial role in both nutrition and economic stability. I know personally a lot of people who base all their livelihood off of livestock and producing meat for human consumption. Healthy animals mean a reliable source of meat, dairy, and other products that are important to people's everyday lives and cultural practices. And I don't think that a lot of people understand just how important and crucial farmers are, because this isn't a lie when we say that it's important in everyone's daily lives. I don't think people realize how much we actually use animal products and stuff that farmers grow day by day. Second, I want to talk about the use of antibiotics in food animals, which is important for our food supplies, but also important for the animal as well. Humans have progressed significantly in the ability to prevent and treat diseases in animals. It's our duty to protect and help maintain stable food supplies, as well as keep a lookout for the protection of the health of the animals.
Hello, I am Yadira Esparza, and today I will be going over the current events that relate to the topic, which in our case is against antibiotics in food animals. A current event that's going on is the USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture. It has passed a new rule where animal owners will be required a valid prescription from the veterinarian in order to purchase antibiotics for their animals. This new rule started in June 11, 2023. So if your animal is sick and is in need of antibiotics, you will now be required to take it to the doctor and get a prescription for it in order to receive them. So they will no longer be able to buy antibiotics over the counter like before, and it has to be from a licensed pharmacist and pharmacy. Farmers who have livestock will be required to have a BCPR, which is a veterinarian client-patient relationship, which is basically like a permit. So on top of the valid prescription for their antibiotics, they will have to have this permit along too. Another current event is the WHO recommendations, which is the World Health Organization, which is an organization that advises farmers to stop the use of antibiotics on their livestock. They are trying to reduce the use of antibiotics on animals, and they're trying to put a stop on antibiotic resistance. So their overall goal is to try to get farmers to use different strategies and other ways before having to use antibiotics. And then for our next slide, it's the group opinion. As a group, we have decided to support the use of antibiotics in food animals. So we don't think that antibiotics are bad for our livestock. We believe that if antibiotics are needed, they should be used, especially because antibiotics play a big part when it comes to health-related issues, especially on our livestock, especially on the meat that we eat. We have to ensure that the meat that we are eating is healthy and edible, so we don't get any type of diseases through them or any bacteria. They also help cure the diseases that the animals are going through related due to the conditions that they live to, and they also help prevent bacteria. And if they're found to be safe to use, then I don't think there should be a problem with using antibiotics, because antibiotics are just like any other medicine. So I think they should be provided to the farmers, but of course with a prescription from a licensed veterinarian. Only then we think that antibiotics should be given to animals when it's a valid reason.
Now moving on to the works cited page. This is a list of all the different sources we used to help make our presentation. Thank you. This concludes our argumentative presentation on why food animals should not be given antibiotics. It causes harm to the animals, and it goes up against multiple different cultural beliefs and ethical beliefs. I hope we've convinced you to believe that you should be against it too.